Welcome to the first episode of Jive Media Africa's webinar series on knowledge served fresh. Um, as generative AI reshapes how we research, write, and communicate, this webinar is asking what's changing, what should we embrace, and what should we question? How does it change the relationship between science and society? And we're really looking forward to hearing from some expert voices who are actively thinking through these shifts, not just as individuals, but also in their conversations with the wider science and communication community. So just a little bit of background for this webinar. Artificial intelligence, particularly generative AI, is reshaping both the practice of research and the craft of science communication. Its impact is felt by researchers, by science communicators, and by others working at the intersection of science, society, and media, and especially those who are grappling with how AI tools influence credibility, ethics, and public trust. Jive Media Africa is an independent communication agency with a special focus on supporting researchers to engage with the world and the society that their work will ultimately impact. And we hope to facilitate the conversations which lead to a better world. And we thought, what better way to do that than with a webinar series, a conversation like this one, a regular gathering of like-minded community to explore how we use communications for good. So this is our first Jive webinar. We're aiming to critically engage with what AI changes, what it enables, and what we as a professional communicators must choose to retain, adapt, or treat with caution in order to continue to shape the world we want to live in. The webinar is going to follow a structured format. We're going to begin with three experts who are each reflecting on today's topic from their own perspectives. We're then going to move into an open Q&A session where we're going to welcome you to ask questions via the chat box. So please be aware that the session is being recorded. It'll be available in due course on our YouTube channel. And make sure you don't miss out on upcoming webinars and other important announcements. Please do sign up to our e-newsletter and stay tuned to the Jive Media Africa channels. And then please do continue to introduce yourselves and engage in the chat box. Don't hesitate to use the chat box for any questions at any time throughout the webinar, and we'll get to those questions a little bit later in the session. So over to the experts. Today, I am pleased to introduce our panel speakers. Everyone's on. Okay, great. Let me start with Gus Silber. Gus is an award-winning journalist, author, scriptwriter, speechwriter, and media trainer. He has an extensive background in newspaper and magazine journalism as a reporter, columnist, feature writer, and editor. And he's authored several books, and I won't go into those details now, but they cover South African socio-political satire, innovation in business, social entrepreneurship, and mobile technologies. But Gus is also a very experienced trainer and mentor, and he works as an external examiner for the Journalism Honours Program at Wits University. So welcome, Gus, and thanks for joining us. Our second speaker today is going to be Sibusiso Biyela. Sibusiso is a leading South African science communicator and journalist known for championing inclusion and language equity in science. He began his journey into science communication in 2014, just over a decade ago, as a finalist in the FameLab South Africa competition. FameLab is a program run in South Africa by Jive Media Africa together with the National Research Foundation's SASTA, and we use that program to engage new voices in science communication. He was studying chemistry and physics at the time, but since then he has moved into science journalism and in particular carved a unique path about looking at using African languages and accessible storytelling to make science more relevant and relatable. He's a former producer for the SABC. He's one of the Mail and Guardian's top 200 young South Africans. And Sibusiso blends deep scientific curiosity with a gift for public engagement. He's currently doing a degree in policy studies at UNISA and continues to advocate for a more inclusive, audience-aware approach to communicating science. Welcome, Sibusiso. Thanks for joining us. And finally, Michelle Riedlinger is joining us from Brisbane in Australia. Michelle is a colleague in science communication who we've met over a number of science communication conferences. Michelle is an associate professor in the School of Communications and a chief investigator in the Digital Media Research Centre at Queensland University of Technology. Her research interests include emerging environmental, agriculture, and health research communication practices, roles for alternative science communicators, online fact-checking, platformized engagement with scientific research, and most recently, generative authenticity. So we're going to hear a little bit more about all of those topics. She collaborates with a team of researchers considering the impacts of generative AI technologies on research communication, building on the team's past research efforts, investigating the platformization of research communication, critical digital literacy, AI's cultures of use, ethics and policy implications. And I know there were a lot of questions that came through around the ethics of AI. How do we make sure we use these ethically and responsibly? So thank you. Having welcomed all of the panel, I'm going to take a back seat and we're going to hear from each of the three panelists as they set the scene a little bit and give us reflections from their spaces about what generative AI is doing and how we can engage with it. Over to you, Gus.
Great. Thank you very much, Robert. To begin with, I think quite a few of you may have noticed yesterday that ChatGPT was down for quite a few hours, and honestly, it was as if the sun had fallen from the sky. If you followed the social media response to it, there was just widespread horror across the media and certainly in parts of academia and in business and so on. A lot of it was obviously exaggerated, but it was kind of evidence of how integrated AI and particularly ChatGPT as a large language model has become in people's everyday workflow. And this has only been really something that took root in November 2022. So not even 3 years ago, this technology has already woven itself into so many aspects of our everyday life. We kind of take it for granted. And when it's not there, there's huge kind of panic as to how we work. It's become so much a part of our instincts. Of course, there are many other tools aside from ChatGPT, but it's once again evidence of ChatGPT being a first mover in the space and almost becoming a generic for AI generative tools. I'm just going to give a very brief and informal overview of the AI landscape and suggest a couple of everyday tools that are becoming very useful. But really, the story of AI begins quite a long time back. It's not a new or recent development at all. In fact, it began really, if you trace this modern history, in academia at MIT in 1966. There was a computer scientist who developed a program called ELIZA. ELIZA became very famous. It was basically a kind of psychotherapy tool where the user would say, for instance, I'm feeling anxious, and ELIZA would in response say, why are you feeling anxious? Tell me about your feelings. And it became a very kind of important and influential example of how people can engage with computers to the extent that they are able to cross a boundary and no longer believe that they're talking to a machine. So in its way, it was an early and actually quite primitive ancestor of ChatGPT. And interestingly, ChatGPT is used by a lot of people for therapy. So much so that that's become one of the controversial aspects. Can you really use a large language model as a substitute or complement for actual psychotherapy? But its ancestors, its roots go back a long way. It's, I think, one of the reasons why AI has grown so fast and why large language models and generative AI have become so powerful is because the parallel technology has expanded as well. So fiber, broadband, mobile technology, always on internet have made it possible for us to use this tool, whereas a few years ago it would have been really outside of maybe the technology world and outside of academic laboratories, difficult to use. But it's become something that has far expanded its original horizons. And originally it was a tool for people in the tech space, really, to experiment with and explore. It's now become and we've seen this in a huge big way. It kind of took Google by surprise, the rise of ChatGPT. Google's status as the default knowledge oracle hasn't really changed. It's still the way most people access information. But a lot of people, I think, are instinctively turning to ChatGPT for queries because it's able to go far beyond simply answering a question. And I think that is where the challenge and the opportunity, and of course, some of the pitfalls arise in that you're able to outsource a lot of your thinking to effectively a machine. It's definitely already got to the stage where people's jobs are not only under threat, but people are actually losing jobs, particularly in media. I think particularly in fields like transcription, for instance, AI is able to do transcription a heck of a lot. In fact, that for me, that's one of the more exciting things about the rise of AI has been the incredible rise of AI as a transcription technology. You can transcribe 2 hours worth of interviews in 5 or 10 minutes, which is amazing. But the and I'm seeing it everywhere, and I've kind of developed, I suppose it's very easy to develop this instinct, the ability to pick out AI written content, and it really is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's on Facebook, it's on social media, it's in a lot of newspapers where where the restraints on using AI are, let's say, a little bit looser than they might be in a place like the New York Times, for instance. But it's very easy to pick up AI generated content, and I think one of the effects of that is that everyone's beginning to sound a little bit like a machine. It's not a robotic machine. It doesn't sound alien or robotic. It sounds human, but it sounds human in a very kind of generic and samey way. So when I see that, I get a kind of sense that people are using AI for the wrong purposes. I prefer to think of it as an augmentative technology, something that can augment human thinking and human practice. As a collaborative tool, it's fantastic. So the landscape at the moment is still dominated by the large language models such as ChatGPT. Of course, there's Google's Gemini, there's Microsoft's Copilot. There are numerous other tools. There's Claude, which is very good in particular at coding and writing. And then there are a number of tools which I think are of specific relevance to people in academia, which take research into a whole new dimension. The one that everyone's been talking about is Google's Notebook LM, which is amazing at being able to digest and illuminate large PDFs and large bodies of work. So for research, tools like that are very good. There's a tool called Manus AI, which is also very good. It's a paid tool though, whereas Notebook LM is free. There's a tool called GenSpark AI, which kind of does the same thing. Another big trend in the AI landscape has been multimodal AI, which basically means it goes beyond mere text. The use of video and other multimedia technologies take the model into all sorts of other spaces. And these are very exciting. And it won't be long before we're seeing the first AI generated full length motion pictures. And we're already seeing AI generated books. So it's changing the creative fields in a huge way. It is changing the way academics work. There are definitely controversies about how it should be used and how it shouldn't be used. But the fact is, it's here to stay. It's very difficult, and especially, I think, for the new generation of digital natives, in other words, millennials and Generation Z students who have grown up with this technology, it's going to be very difficult to reverse the use of AI and to say that it shouldn't be used. So I think what it's doing in the academic environment is it's giving a real kind of challenge and an opportunity in the sense of how do we deal with this technology? How do we make the best use of it? Because you can't simply say you can't use it. Um, there are certainly academics who are using it in very progressive and interesting ways as a complement to more traditional ways of study and research. But we've definitely reached a point from where there's no turning back in every field, really. But I think particularly in the academic field, which is very often at the forefront, obviously, of knowledge, illumination, and thinking and research, how do academics use AI? How should they use AI? How should scientists use AI to communicate? These are all questions that hopefully we'll be able to look at today, but they're also great opportunities to advance, I think, the cause of human knowledge in a way that hasn't been possible almost since certainly the arrival of the internet, but almost really it's a new kind of renaissance. I'm a utopian when it comes to AI. I believe it's ultimately going to be of good for humanity, but there definitely are concerns, and hopefully we'll be able to look at those also today. So yeah, that's a brief look at the landscape and where we are and what sort of opportunities and challenges we face.
Hi. Yes. Thanks, Gus. I'll just hop on that. Yeah, it's the thing about AI, as I've been quoted recently, is that there's a lot of antagonism around AI, and it's quite well placed, especially with reading articles and not being told that it's been done with AI, either AI assisted or completely. And I was having a discussion with a colleague at the SAPC recently, who's quite excited about AI video and other quote unquote art that's been generated using AI and how impressive it is. And I agree. But there's this thing with audiences that sort of when they hear that something has been generated with AI, they sort of turn away from it. It becomes less of an achievement, knowing that it wasn't really done by a human, it was done by AI. It's sort of this thing that this idea that people have had about like special effects in movies, like CGI. People for a long time actually did think that you just told a computer to generate something and it'll give you like some cool looking graphics or things like that. But people don't actually know that there's a lot of artistry that goes into it. Like you hear that it's computer generated, but like it's rendered using a computer, but humans have to do all the details in there. Now AI presents a new paradigm shift in that you can create a video that would have taken many hours of work and teams of people. Like you can do it like quite instantly. And with platforms like Google's VO 3, it just shows all the great improvement and what's happening in that space. But coming back to how it's going to affect us as communicators and how we do our work. We have to have these discussions because AI or generative AI is here, and we have to be able to use it and understand it, and also always be ethical in letting people know that it's being used and how it's being used. And I think it's important that our audiences and ourselves understand its limitations and how it actually works. Like, for example, we call it Gen AI or generative artificial intelligence, but it's in no way at all intelligent. It's usually a lot of large language models, like Gus said, it started as experiments being done by some tech firms. It's an automaton that makes it look like it's thinking, but it's not. It's very cleverly it's like works like a very clever prediction model that uses a lot of computing power to make it look like it's thinking for us, but it's not. The thinking is always being done by people, and that's the thing that I want to convey today. That AI never does any thinking. It's always us, and what it produces is something that's been trained to give us what it thinks we want, but it doesn't. Oh, I mean, well, it doesn't think, but it's been trained to give us what we want from it. And there's a few more advanced models these days, like reasoning models, that will show you the steps that it took to get to that to the result that you ask it. But there's just so much that I hope we'll be able to discuss today. But the biggest thing is that we always have, as communicators, accountability. Whether we use Notebook LM or anything else or any other tool, it should be that you as a communicator are the human in the loop, right? It should always be, I think that anything that an LLM produces that you will present as your work, you have to be accountable for it, right? Like, can you account for every line that's in that text, whether you changed it or if it's summarizing something that you haven't seen. Like when it comes to summarizing, maybe you're explaining complex texts, I would never just ask it to explain it before I have a look myself, right? Like it should be that I can relate to it, I can correct wherever it's wrong. It just makes my job easier, but it doesn't do my job for me, right? And it's something else that we'll discuss as well is just the advent of being able to communicate science in underserved languages, such as languages in Africa, and some of the generative AI tools that are being created to help in that respect. So, and another thing also that I think would like to touch on is the difference that AI or generative AI tools are when it comes to previous technologies like the internet and virtual reality, something that has been buzzwords for the past few years, and the blockchain and things like that, is that the difference is these technologies have been given to us before they were ready, especially with ChatGPT. Not that they weren't ready for use, but I don't think they were ready for the public because we didn't know what to do with them. Like we had to, they were given to us like something cool is happening, but there were problems looking for solutions, and to some degree they still are. And to some degree, we as the users have a lot of control over them. There's something called prompt injection, where like these big companies still don't know how to protect against that. There'll be prompts that a company will ring fence that they don't want you to make your their LLM do, but if you put it in certain brackets or do certain things in the data that you're giving it, you can make it do certain things that it does. So it's sort of like hacking, right? So it's these tools that they've given to us that they don't really have total control over. So it's one of those things that, yes, they'll give us tools with the LLMs that they want us to use them for, but we can also program in a way our own use for those tools. So it's quite different than previous technologies. Like you can make your own app in a way. You can break the whole system if you want in a certain way. So it is quite different from previous technologies. Yeah.
Thanks, Sibusiso. Maybe I'll hand straight over to Michelle. I see a couple of questions are coming through on the chat, so please do feel free to keep adding those. Sibusiso, if you're welcome to jump into the chat as well and respond to questions that are coming through to you from there. And Michelle, yeah, some of your thoughts.
Oh, thanks very much. I feel like I'm hopefully building on what Gus and Sibu have said. But yeah, I'm a researcher, so I'm looking at people in the knowledge industries, so journalism, academic publishing, do a lot of work with fact checkers and also science communicators, and looking at how these tools are used for content creation and also content dissemination. So I thought I'd talk about some of the current public expectations and ethical issues, and yeah, try to offer some practical guidance for people working in science communication. So yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about a research project we've been doing with news consumers and how they feel about using generative AI in media, because I think science communication particularly is an extension of a lot of this. And we did a study looking at news audiences in Australia and Germany, and we found that, yeah, people are most worried about things that you would expect: misinformation, copyright violations, and the displacement of human labour. I guess we were just surprised at the level of knowledge people had. And I think, like Sibo said, the key takeaway is that people don't necessarily reject AI, they just want greater transparency. So I think 85% of our participants said they wanted the use of AI tools to be disclosed, and they asked for visible labels. So if you're using these technologies in a very output reflective way, they ideally wanted that directly placed on content. So some suggested some sort of universal symbol to indicate AI involvement. Now there's some issues around this, and we can get into this, but yeah, something like a nutritional label have been what people looking at. And I think we're seeing a rise of this whole, I guess we call it authenticity infrastructure, Adobe and labeling kinds of particularly multimodal content, visual content, looking at the labeling, Meta's looking at that too. But yeah, I think importantly, audiences told us that they want AI to support journalists, not replace them. So I think aligning with what our other panelists have said. And I think then we can extrapolate for science communication that audiences want human creativity, empathy, accountability to remain at the heart of science communication. So if we're thinking about a touchstone for us as a community, it's really, that human in the loop and having human oversight, using these as augmenting tools rather than replacement. Whether we see organisational pressure to do more automation than we are perhaps comfortable with, this is something we've got to think about for the future of our field. I think there's something interesting for us to unpack there about authenticity. I think Sibu was talking about how AI-generated content is seen as less valuable, less authentic, and this might change over time because we've seen, I think a good example would be in academic publishing, where we've seen open access going from something that was a little bit dodgy when it was first developed, when journals were at the field, and now it's the gold standard. Being a diamond open access journal is the gold standard for journal publishing. So we might see changes over time. We can't assume that generative AI content will be considered less authentic or less valuable, but I think that's where we're at the moment, which is the struggle when we say about labeling. Anyway, I'm digressing, so I really just want to talk about some of the things we found, because I think we were surprised at how much news consumers particularly were wanting to see AI mostly for background and supportive tasks, really less comfortable when AI takes over those final stage creative and editorial decisions. And also, there can be a real grey area with how much AI is used to support and how much AI becomes a substitution for the tasks we do. And I think that's where science communicators' judgment comes in. Because I think we've got a changing landscape. Generative AI tools are evolving. The technologies are evolving all the time. So what we talk about and decide on in terms of our ethical standards or our own practices today may be very different in a couple of months' time. We can see massive changes over very short periods of time with these technologies. But I think there's some general principles you can think about. And so the first thing I'd like to suggest is this metaphor of forklifting, where you've got the forklift, it goes under large pieces of large commodities and it's moved around, as opposed to weightlifting, which is this kind of skill strengthening task. And I think this metaphor might be useful because I think if we're thinking about repetitive or time-consuming tasks, they're forklifting tasks. So, I think Gus mentioned the transcribing interviews, translating content, drafting emails even. AI might be able to help here, but you can still steer and oversee what's going on. You're still the expert driving what's going on. But I think weightlifting tasks are where we want to build strength. So even things like framing stories for particular audiences, learning about your audiences, interpreting data for particular audiences, I think these are tasks that we arguably should be doing on our own, because that's where the value of our expertise lies. And I think if we offload too much of that weightlifting to AI, we risk weakening our long-term capability as communicators. And I think Gus talked about students, and I think this is going to be the issue if you're outsourcing expertise as opposed to outsourcing those repetitive tasks. So really prompting your thinking before you start going into outsourcing these tools. Another way to think about generative AI use in terms of ethics is the use of Uber, or the Uberization of tasks. So you could make yourself a cup of coffee, or you could order one through Uber. And I think ordering is easy, but there's all that hidden labor and energy behind the scenes, you know, from the barista to the driver to the data centers, things you don't see. And I think generative AI can feel just as magical as an instant as ordering a coffee from Uber, which seems extremely decadent. Gen AI tool use, it isn't free. There's energy, infrastructure, and all those ethical issues around whose information you're using, what data's been scraped for training of these tools. So I'd say for everybody, before you hand over a task to generative AI, consider those hidden costs. I think we don't know enough about what those will be. And I think our news audiences, particularly audiences of science communication, are getting much more savvy around these things. Finally, I'm thinking the risks of getting things wrong are particularly high in science communication, and we did some research. 7 countries, including Australia, asking people about their perceptions and use of generative AI tools for science-related information searching. And we found that there's broad public understanding that AI tools can hallucinate. So there's a real awareness of that, and that there's biases in training data. So gender, race, geography, and class. So these are things that we already know. But I think this real understanding of nuance with audiences that we weren't expecting right across the demographic. So some of our science information searchers, were considering generative AI tools like calculators. They thought in future they're just going to get better and work faster like a calculator has for arithmetic. But, as Sibo said, we've got all this, they're probability calculators. So I think that metaphor of the calculator misses that important point. If you're not going to get reliable or fixed answers with some of these tools. 3 plus 3 will always equal 6 on a calculator. We don't question it. But I think generative AI is something different. And we've been talking in our team a little bit about this this kind of metaphor. And I think it's more like a talking mirror in a fairy tale. So the mirror listens to your questions and it responds with answers and stories, but the responses, they might seem fluent and persuasive and tailored just for you, but while they draw on all the conversations and technology they've been trained on and have access to, they create something new in the moment. And sometimes they tell the truth, but sometimes an LLM chatbot might decide to flatter you. We're seeing a lot more work around sycophancy. Sometimes it makes things up, and not out of malice. These tools just don't know the difference. This is about probability. So I don't think generative AI tools are speeding up tasks like the calculator so much. They're just shaping how we think and write and understand the world. And I think these tools are, not just reflecting our knowledge, but remixing it and repackaging it. And that danger that Gus said about it flatten everything. We're just seeing, things maybe getting a little bit more boring. So I think we need to think about that when we're using these tools. What kind of mirror are we looking into, and who's looking along with us, or who's resisting that? Because we've got to respect that people want to know how these tools are being used and how they're buying in. So I think this whole notion of authenticity is, particularly with science journalism and science communication, is really important and tied up with credibility and trust. So I think we need to think about that. So disclosing AI use early and clearly, even knowing that doing so may influence the way in which your audiences respond. thinking about consistent visual cues or symbols and giving audiences control. So, giving them the ability to disengage if an AI tool's involved or there's AI generated content, and make sure there's on-demand explanation, specifically how that's being used. I'm old enough to remember genetically modified organisms when they first came out, and sitting in meetings where people said, we can't possibly label commodities as GM. That's just not possible. And nobody, I think, would think about that now. It's just something we do. So I think we can learn a lot from those past kinds of technologies. Okay, so I'd say very few newsrooms when we were looking at this work, and this was about 6 months ago, had clear policies on how they used AI and public-facing policies. So I'd encourage everybody working in these knowledge industries to really make it clear, and universities as well, how their researchers are particularly using it. I don't think we've got time to get into science watchdog journalism, but I think that is a role for science communicators as well, is thinking about how these tools are being used in knowledge production, creating science. But yeah, I want to get on and leave some time to discussion. So I guess, some prompts before you prompt that I'd think about. Is this a task I'm better off doing myself? Is this something that's going to help me learn? Am I building my craft, or am I taking away from my work as a professional? Is this forklifting or weightlifting? Am I calling an Uber for something that I could easily make? I think science communication deserves thoughtful tools and thoughtful users. So what will ensure our publics and audiences to make sure they have authentic interactions, disclose, collaborate with others, stay in the loop as a human, and design trust for trust, I think. I'll leave it there and we can have some discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Gus and Sibusiso. I wonder if we can have all the panelists on the screen. Thanks so much. Really fascinating. And such a huge domain. I mean, I think people will have come to this conversation to gain different insights, and you'll have discovered that there's a whole lot more thinking going on around other aspects of this. I've got a quick question. I'm going to do a rapid fire. I want to ask each of you. So this has started to be, each of you is using some of these tools. Some of you are exploring some of these tools. I'd like to ask each of you, what's a definite yes? Like, this is what I can confidently, happily use an AI tool for, and perhaps name the tool that you're using. And then what's a definite no? When would you just say, I would never use AI for that? And then I think Michelle has touched on quite a lot of the ethical issues, but for you, what's your biggest concern around AI from an ethical point of view? What unintended consequences could it have in the world as the world starts to use more and more of these tools? So I'm going to quickly ask each of you rapid fire questions, and then we're definitely going to get on to some of the questions in the chat and some of the questions that were submitted before. So who wants to jump in first? Your big yes, your big no, and what's the big ethical concerns that it raises for you?
I'm happy to start. I think the number one tool that I use repeatedly on mobile and on desktop is definitely AI transcription. There's a technology from OpenAI called Whisper, and I think it's actually even more exciting than ChatGPT. It used to be a massive chore for me to transcribe interviews and research notes and anything that required speech to be turned into text. It's now almost an afterthought. It's so incredibly easy, and it requires actually very little human intervention afterwards. It's incredibly accurate, even with people's names, even with brand names. It punctuates. It's just amazing. So that for me is the most fantastic AI tool, I think, far better than the LLMs. What I definitely wouldn't, where I absolutely draw the line, I use ChatGPT and other tools for outlining, occasionally for brainstorming. I certainly use it for research, for basic research, which I then kind of take further because I'm very aware of hallucination and inaccuracy. But the one thing that I wouldn't do, and which really worries me, is outsourcing the entire creative process to AI. There's a wonderful phrase that I came across recently about the calm tyranny of using AI. It's so tempting, it's almost irresistible to just say, with a simple prompt, turn this into an essay, turn this into a thesis, whatever your prompt is, to just give up your creative energies and your creative abilities. To me, that's actually scary, and it's so easy to do. And it's also so easy. I see a few people have asked about the detection of AI. It's actually very difficult to detect AI-generated content. And for every tool that says it's possible to generate, another tool comes up to humanize your AI. So it's an ongoing battle, but that's where I would draw the line. I wouldn't use AI because I enjoy writing. I think you have to, at some level, no matter how torturous it is, no matter how painful it is, you have to actually find some joy in the creative aspect of your work. So that's where I would draw the line. I'd use the tool, and I love Michelle's forklift and weightlifting metaphor. I would use it for those purposes, but when it comes to creativity and human thinking, that's where I would draw the line.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. For me, a task is a tool that I use quite a lot in addition to the transcription because it's incredible. I try to use AI tools as a very advanced Control F function. Sometimes, if you're looking through a vast amount of text, let's say something has already been transcribed, but it's been transcribed in such a way that you're looking for related things like related words that if you used a simple Control F function to find something in a very large text, it wouldn't find it exactly. But AI sort of understands what you were trying to look for, what you were trying to find. So it can find those related things. So sometimes I'll have a very long text that's been transcribed and I'm looking for specific sentiments in it, and it'll tell me where it is and it'll show me in the citation where I can find that thing. And then I continue that work myself instead of brute forcing, reading every single thing, hoping that I don't miss it as I'm scrolling through because the control function wasn't working. So, and another thing as well is I love the fact that you can have some of these open tools, open source tools that you can run on your own machine locally using a tool that I like called LM Studio. If you remember, there was this tool that came out, this LLM that came out from China, getting the name now. But when it came out, it was open source, so anyone can basically use it. I was able, you can like download it for like a few gigs, depending on the size that you want, and you can run it on a normal Windows or other kind of machine. And I'm able to use the AI tool without sending my data to some faraway server. And besides the privacy issue, there's also the issue of what happens when that system you're using isn't working. There's a connection issue like with ChatGPT. I'm able to use LM Studio, and LM Studio can use different LLMs. There's Gemma, which is like the Gemini, but the free version of Gemini. There's different kinds, like the Chinese one, which I'm forgetting, which is an amazing reasoning model. So yeah, it's so the thing that I would stay away from that is a no-no for me is it's for two reasons. It's the practical reasons and also just an art reason. I'm not convinced that I don't get the point of generative AI tools for art, like for video or images. And it's not like the look that it gives you. It can be incredibly convincing and look really good, but I don't understand the point of it. Usually they'll say maybe it's for artists to make their work easier, but when you do get generative AI things, it's not given to you in a bunch of layers or a timeline. If it's a video, like a timeline that you can separate when you're editing, like it would be better if it was giving you something that you can then edit. But when it gives you something like a video, it's already done. There's nothing you can do to it. You can prompt it here and there, but like it takes so much time that it's might as well have done it. You've done it for yourself. And as a growing artist, not teaching you to draw better or to do photography better or anything like that. I'm not convinced as yet, and why there's so much money and effort being put into these systems to generate imagery. It can be used in unethical ways, but beyond that, I haven't been convinced as yet, like what the point of it is in any way. Especially when people realize that a picture or a video has been generated using AI, they're less interested in it, even if it's an action thing or something lovely. Like there's just no knowing that a human didn't make that, like it defeats the whole purpose of it. So yeah, that's the no for me.
Great. Michelle, quickly, because I want to get a few more.
No, that's fine. And I guess I'm scrabbling because I'm thinking about in terms of writing, that's what I end up doing a lot of. I think the transcription software, like you said, it's huge. And that's probably for me the same thing. But yeah, I was just thinking about the art. I mean, I've played a lot with Midjourney and we have a bit of fun with it because I'm thinking about academic presentations. Sometimes you can have really I guess high level concepts that are very hard to describe, and it can really help you with a presentation, getting something, a metaphor or getting something down where, acknowledged, of course, that it's come from generative AI. But yeah, I see a lot of people working in our space where I am, using some of those art tools to communicate quite complex ideas in visual ways. So yeah, I'd say using some of those is probably good. There's some academic ones. I'd say Consensus and Elicit are good for supplementing if you're doing academic searches, and Consensus is a really interesting one for I think it's a very blunt in terms of how much scientific consensus there is about issues, but you can query it and at least get a sense of some of the relevant literature, which I think is an interesting one to play with if you're interested in communicating, recently emerging research. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm noticing a couple of questions in the chat are focused on this idea of how do you detect whether AI has been used. So we definitely, a lot of people who we're talking to in our work are obviously spending a lot of time in the teaching and learning space as opposed to the research space. And so those where some of those questions are coming from. I don't want to really get into those tools because as Gus has indicated, as tools move in to try and detect those, then you can work your way around them and game them. And in fact, even the tools that people rely on quite heavily, like Turnitin and others, have really been debunked. Debunked, but certainly critiqued from a perspective of they don't only pick up use of other people's material, they also pick up different language use. So you can get low scores on Turnitin because you're a second language user, not because you borrowed a lot of information from another paper. And so these things are not foolproof. And I think it really comes down to trying to structure tasks that will get your learners to think about A, how to use these tools, and B, how to use these tools well. And I suppose that's really
having those conversations with them about forklifting and weightlifting, saying, well, why are you here? If you're here to get a degree, that's great, but you're going to go out in the workforce and have nothing to be able to draw on because you won't have developed that strengthening skill set. So I think having some more honest conversations around, use the tools, but you're doing yourself a disservice, for your whole degree. Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah, with that, it's students are being told basically not to use these tools, but all the marketing and all the talk around AI is touting it as being the future, sort of. So with a lot of some people that I've spoken to in some of the spaces that I've been in, it's the idea is sort of that you're telling me to not use these AI tools to do these things, but AI is the future, and whatever work that I'm going to be doing, these skills that you want me to learn seem to be now outmoded. So what would be the point of learning all these things instead of
move with the times?
Tools? Where a lot of that is wrong, right? But and so much is moving, the ground is moving from underneath us that we like we need to be telling students to be careful with the use of these tools, but also to help them in how to use them to better the skills that they already have. Because a lot of times, like at UNISA, being a student there at the moment, some of the assignments and exams, you're told not to use AI in any way, right? And it's easier for me because as a millennial, like AI is a very recent thing for me. But as the years go on, there's people who are exposed to the only way that they can do any of these things is with AI, right? So they'll find ways instead of trying to not use AI, they'll find ways to conceal their use of AI, and there are already tools that enable you to do that, right? So it's the point isn't not to use AI in a way, but like to not use AI to replace whatever skills that you have to have as a student. And it's quite a moving target at the moment. I don't know how to solve it as yet, but I think that's a discussion that we need to have a bit more in how we approach it.
Yeah, but I think really reinforcing this idea that we're placing ourselves in these situations in order to think as researchers, to learn to think in academic institutions. As far as research is concerned, we're really trying to create new knowledge. And I suppose fundamentally the generative AI work, while it uses language, which is a common resource between us, it can pull language, and as such it can be quite convincing, and one can almost imagine it has a personality to the extent that you start using pleases and thank yous when you're talking to it. Some people do. I've been laughed at for doing that. But ultimately, it's about a system that is pulling knowledge from elsewhere. And I think fundamental to this notion of research or creating new solutions to new challenges, new solutions to contextual challenges, is that ultimately that knowledge is going to come from the creative engagement with the world by humans, not by synthesizing what's been done out there and what's available on the web. And I suppose one of the things I concern myself with is how much of what becomes placed on the web is then generated by AI itself. And so we get a dilution, and perhaps Gus spoke to this idea of sort of heading towards a sort of soup of nothingness. And there's this real opportunity to do creative thinking within that. We've got 5 minutes left in this conversation. I'd like to ask you to just have a click in the chat. There is a little evaluation form. It's our first webinar. We would really love to know what's worked, what hasn't worked, what would you have liked to have seen more of, what would you have liked to have seen less. So if we can ask you, don't use ChatGPT to fill it in. We just want you to respond from your heart about what's working and what hasn't worked for you. And then I think just to also say this is really a little jump across the surface. We're really touching on some of these areas of this emerging technology. But as a science communication production and training organization, we've done a lot of work thinking about how to synthesize and package some of these skills. So we've got a number of training programs. We've got a range of training programs just in science communication, generally speaking to the media, strategizing your science communication, how to do engaging young people in participatory ways, etc., etc. And you'll find all of those on links in the chat. So by all means, jump in there if that's something of interest to you, for you. I'm going to give everyone.
Can I give a shout out to, I think we talked about this, Mohammed Elson-Badi, who's also running science communication workshops and does a lot of work on prompt patterns. And so that's something that I think if you're interested in thinking about experimenting with some of these tools and playing with them in systematic ways, you might want to think about that. So, yeah.
Ultimately, if we're going to be driving these tools, then we want to have a clear sense of how to drive them. And I
Yeah,
suppose,
well, and talking with him, he's often saying, like it actually gives you time to do more of the deep thinking if you can outsource some of these, forklifting tasks to AI. We're inundated with emails, with content, are there ways in which we can actually sort out our lives so we can do? I mean, I'd love that as being our future. I'd really love it if we could do some more deep thinking, that these tools would help us do more critical deep thinking. Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, and just to close off on there's a couple of questions that I wanted to answer quickly. There's a link that I've just pasted in the comments, the chat, about, there's been some questions about just the role of AI in promoting African language LLMs or science communication. And I've just pasted a link there from a story that was published that I co-wrote in Nature, was published, I think about a week ago. There you'll find some examples about LLMs being developed in the global south for using materials from languages such as Xhosa, Sesotho, and other languages from around the world, in India as well. So you can check that out for more info. But there are efforts being done to try to create these tools.
Fantastic.
That's really cool.
I think I must give the last word to Gus. So, don't know if you've got anything to add, sort of reflection you've been hearing.
I think it's great to be actually discussing these issues and these tools. My closing thought really would be, I think we're all actually incredibly lucky to be living in this age of a new kind of digital, creative, technical renaissance. And I think really these tools should be used experimentally. They should be used for fun, and they should be used for serious work as well. But honestly, we definitely have reached a point where we can't go back to the way things were done before. I think what's likely to happen in years to come is that there'll be resistance. There'll be a school of people who will return to analog ways of working, and it'll almost be like the revival of vinyl records in the music industry. But I would encourage everyone to explore as much as possible and not be worried about breaking these machines. They aren't going to be broken easily. Rather, kick the wheels, have fun with them, and use them to the best possible collaborative solution. Use your human ingenuity and creativity, and let the machines, as Michelle said earlier, do the heavy lifting.
Fantastic, Gus. I think that's a really good note to end on. I love all of these analogies. Analogies are obviously a powerful tool for science communicators for getting our heads around tough concepts. And I love what occurred to me is we would never jump into a car without having learned to drive the thing. We've got these tools at our disposal, and we'll use them, but we've got to be aware of the dangers that using them for the wrong things can bring about in the world. So I think that's for me to say a huge thank you to all of the panelists. It's been fantastic to have this conversation. Thanks very much also to all of our wonderful guests. Please do sign up to e-newsletters. We'll have more of these chats. We are going to post a video of this session online, and we will be writing a summary article about this session, which will be posted in due course. So please do keep following us on our channels, and from our side, thank you very much and go well.